are places where the land does not end so much as loosen, where soil softens gradually, where grasses thin and darken, where the air itself seems to lower and press closer to the earth. You do not arrive at such places all at once. You cross into them without ceremony, one step firmer than the next, until you realize the ground has begun to hold you differently. Tonight, we walk into one of those places. Welcome to Veiled Beasts. If you are new here, follow the show so these quiet crossings continue to find you. And if, at the end, you feel reluctant to leave the marsh behind, there is always a deeper path waiting on Patreon. But for now, let your breathing slow, let the world narrow, let the earth soften beneath your feet. The traveler did not intend to find the wetlands. The path had been dry at first, pale dust lifting faintly with each step, brittle grasses bowing under a wind that carried warmth from open land. The horizon had stretched wide and uncomplicated, sky pressing downward in a broad blue arc. Then the wind shifted, not stronger, not colder, simply quieter. The grasses grew thicker and greener. The soil between the traveler's boots darkened from tan to brown to a muted, damp gray that held footprints for a fraction longer before releasing them. The scent of air changed, losing its dry sweetness and taking on the weight of water not yet seen. Somewhere ahead, reeds began to rise. At first, they appeared as faint vertical pattern against the horizon, then as distinct stalks, then as a pale forest of narrow leaves, whispering against one another in voices too soft to be called wind. The traveler slowed without deciding to. There is something about wetlands that alters the pace of the body. The ground does not permit haste. It receives weight carefully, considering each step before accepting it. The first channel of water revealed itself not in shimmer, but in absence. A dark seam where grasses gave way to reflection. The surface lay flat and opaque, not sparkling like a river, not restless like a stream. It held the sky in a muted inversion, clouds drifting pale and elongated across a field of dim silver. Paper bark trees leaned inward from the edges of the marsh, their trunks pale and peeling in thin, curling strips that hung loosely before detaching and falling to the surface below. When the bark touched the water, it did not create sharp rings. The surface dipped gently inward, absorbing the contact as though accustomed to receiving small, quiet things. The traveler stepped closer. Mud yielded underfoot with a soft resistance, not unstable but aware. Each step pressed downward and was met by a cool firmness rising to meet it. Moisture steeped upward, faint and persistent, carrying with it the scent of submerged roots and slow decay. There were sounds. Distant birds called once and did not repeat. Insects traced slow arcs above the reeds. The faint brush of stalk against stalk formed a restless hush that never fully resolved into silence. And beneath these sounds, beneath even the faintest stirring of air, something else persisted. A low resonance, not heard, felt. It existed in the soles of boots, in the hollow of the chest, in the subtle vibration between breath and stillness. It did not pulse or echo. It endured. The traveler paused at the edge of the channel. Clouds passed overhead. In the water they followed, but not precisely. The reflection lagged just enough to suggest that the sky beneath the surface moved according to its own measure. A dragonfly skimmed across the channel, its wings flashing briefly in sunlight. Its shadow crossed the water and lingered there for a fraction of a moment longer than the insect itself remained above. Then both were gone. The traveler stepped into the marsh. The mud accepted the intrusion without protest. Coolness rose through leather and bone. The air thickened, settling across shoulders like an unseen shawl. Mist gathered low over the surface, drifting in thin veils that clung to the water, but never lifted fully into the air. It moved not with wind, but with depth, curling faintly where the channel darkened and smoothing where it shallowed. The traveler followed the bend of water inward. Reeds brushed softly against arms, leaving streaks of dampness that did not dry. Paper bark trunks arched overhead, their reflections stretching downward into water that seemed deeper than it had any right to be. The resonance beneath the ground shifted. Not louder, closer, as though the marsh once entered had adjusted its awareness to include what stood within it. The channel narrowed and curved, revealing ahead a darker shape, a bend where the water gathered and pooled more heavily, where light struck the surface and did not return. The traveler approached slowly. The mud near the bend felt firmer, compacted by years of stillness. The air cooled perceptibly, though the sun had not yet shifted far in the sky. The surface of the bend lay perfectly flat, not glassy, not reflective, flat, as though stretched tight across something immense beneath. The traveler knelt. For a long moment, nothing changed. Then, without ripple or splash, the surface dipped inward slightly at its center, a shallow concavity forming as though pressed from below. It held longer than a ripple should, long enough to suggest weight. Then it eased. The water returned to stillness. The traveler did not retreat. There was no sudden fear, no sharp instinct to flee, only awareness widening, settling, as though the boundary between air and water had thinned. Another shift moved beneath the bend, this time broader, The entire surface lifted in a slow arc and lowered again without breaking. The reflection of trees elongated, stretched downward into the dark, their pale trunks dissolving into shadow that had no visible end. For the briefest instant, the traveler's own reflection wavered, shoulders widening, edges softening, before coming back into alignment. The resonance beneath the mud deepened, not urgent, not aggressive, simply present. The Bunyip did not rise from the water. She did not need to. She existed in the way light failed to return, in the way reflections hesitated before aligning, in the subtle, patient adjustments beneath the surface that suggested a body vast enough to remain unseen. The traveler remained at the bend. Time thinned. Sunlight filtered through the paper bark canopy in angled shafts that seemed to drift sideways rather than downward. The mist over the water shifted slowly, obscuring and revealing the center in gentle intervals. The concavity formed again, deeper this time, a depression in the water that suggested immense mass below, not moving toward the surface, but turning within its own depth. The traveler leaned forward slightly, the resonance aligned briefly with the rhythm of breath. For a moment, the distinction between body and marsh blurred, not dissolved, softened, as though the traveler were no longer simply standing beside the bend, but participating in its quiet, enduring awareness. The surface steadied, the depression eased, but something had shifted, not in the water alone, but in the space between watcher and watched, and beyond the bend, deeper within the reeds, another stretch of darker stillness waited. Beyond the bend, the reeds gathered close again, their pale stalks knitting together in a loose, whispering wall that parted where the ground rose slightly into a narrow spine of firmer earth. The traveler followed it without deciding to do so, drawn not by sound or sight, but by the subtle continuation of that low, enduring resonance beneath the soil. The air grew cooler as the path lifted, not colder in temperature, but deeper in feeling, as though each breath carried more weight than the one before it. Moisture clung to skin in a fine sheen, neither dripping nor drying, simply remaining. The reeds thinned abruptly, and there, enclosed by leaning paper bark trunks that arched so close their peeling skins nearly touched overhead, lay another pool. This one did not stretch wide like the bend. It held itself inward, contained, circular, quiet. Its surface was darker than shadow, darker than the underside of storm clouds. Light reached it and seemed to fold in upon itself, swallowed without shimmer or protest. The traveler stepped to the edge. The mud here did not yield at all. It pressed and settled, compacted by long years of patient observation. Falling strips of bark rested on the water as though laid carefully there, drifting only slightly, never reaching the opposite bank. There were no insects, no distant birds. Even the reeds beyond the ring of trunks stood still, as if the marsh had drawn a boundary of quiet around this place. The resonance beneath the ground shifted again, layered now, one rhythm deep and vast, slow as continental drift, another nearer, subtle, attentive. The traveler did not kneel this time. They simply stood and watched. For a long while, nothing altered. Then, gently, the surface of the pool trembled, not with ripple, not with wind, with adjustment. A faint horizontal movement passed beneath the blackness, as though something immense had shifted its weight from one side to the other. The water did not break. It thickened. The reflection of the leaning trunks stretched downward, elongating until their pale shapes seemed to sink into a depth far greater than the pool's visible diameter. The traveler felt the tremor, not through the air, but through the soles of boots, a soft upward pressure that met the downward weight of the body. Recognition, not invitation, not warning. Recognition. The surface darkened at its center, not visually, not in a way that could be measured, but perceptibly, as though density itself had risen closer to the skin of the water. The traveler inhaled slowly. The air carried a faint mineral scent, something ancient and submerged, something that had not known sunlight for a very long time. The density below shifted again, and this time, instead of forming a swell, it created a shallow inward curve at the center of the pool, a depression that held shape longer than water should. The traveler did not step back. The depression deepened slightly, widening outward in silence. Within that concavity, the faintest suggestion of movement turned, not defined, not shaped, simply a slow rotation of shadow within shadow. It was not possible to say whether it was seen or sensed. The effect was the same. Scale, vastness contained without being confined. The traveler's reflection hovered at the surface, softened, indistinct. For a brief moment, the reflected outline appeared broader than it should have been, as though the water interpreted rather than copied what stood above it. A breath in, the reflection expanded. A breath out, it settled. But the timing was imperfect, lagging, listening. The depression in the center eased. The surface returned to flatness. And yet the sense of proximity remained, closer now than it had been at the bend, as though whatever lay below had not withdrawn entirely, but lowered itself just enough to remain unseen. Time altered again. The shafts of sunlight, filtering between the paperback trunks, seemed to slow their descent, drifting sideways across the water before dissolving. A thin curl of bark detached from overhead and fell toward the surface. But its movement appeared softened, delayed, as though the air resisted allowing it to land. When it touched the water, it did not ripple outward. It parted inward, then sealed. The resonance beneath the mud aligned briefly with the traveler's breathing. Not perfectly, but close enough that the boundary between self and landscape blurred at the edges. For a moment, it felt as though the body did not end at skin, but extended downward in invisible strands, touching the same depth that stirred below. The sensation was not frightening. It was immense. There's a difference between being watched and being included. Here at the second pool, the traveler felt included, not as prey, not as intruder, as presence within the larger community. The surface lifted again, this time in a broad, nearly imperceptible roll that passed from one side of the pool to the other. The entire sheet of black water rose and settled without breaking. When it settled, the density beneath seemed deeper, more distant, and yet somehow more certain. The traveler remained still, long enough for the air to grow warmer at the edges of the ring of trunks, long enough for a single insect to test the boundary of quiet before retreating again, long enough for the sense of merging to soften into something gentler, less immediate, more atmospheric. Gradually, without clear decision, the traveler shifted weight backward. The mud responded faintly, pressing upward once more beneath the boots. Acknowledgement. The surface did not react. It did not follow. It did not ripple in farewell. It simply remained black, patient, immeasurable. And beneath it, the Bunyip endured, not as a creature confined to shape, but as depth itself, as the slow adjustment of water to unseen movement, as the quiet that gathers where light fails to return. The traveler stepped away from the ring of trunks. The reeds beyond seemed taller now, though they had not grown. The air felt thinner at their edges, but even as the path reformed beneath steady steps, the resonance did not vanish. It lingered, softer, more distant, yet still present, as though the marsh did not relinquish what had stood within it, but carried the impression forward in unseen layers. Behind the traveler, the second pool lay undisturbed, its surface flat, its depths unbroken, waiting not for return, but simply continuing. The traveler did not hurry away from the ring of trunks. There are departures that feel decisive, and there are departures that feel like thinning fog, gradual, almost imperceptible, until the landscape has rearranged itself and one realizes distance has formed. The narrow spine of firmer earth led back toward the bend, though it seemed less distinct now, softened by the same quiet that had gathered around the second pool. The reeds brushed gently at the traveler's sleeves as they passed, their narrow leaves cool and damp, tracing faint lines that lingered on the skin like a memory. The air shifted as the traveler moved, not warmer, not brighter, simply lighter at the edges, as though the deeper layers of stillness had remained behind within the circle of leaning trunks. The resonance beneath the mud did not disappear. It widened, no longer concentrated beneath a single stretch of black water. It spread outward into the greater marsh, subtler, less immediate, yet unmistakably present. The bend came into view once more. Its surface lay as it had before, flat, opaque, holding the sky in a dim and imperfect inversion. But now the traveler noticed how the reflections did not merely mirror what stood above. They seemed to carry traces of what had already passed, faint elongations, slight misalignments that felt less like distortion and more like accumulation. A slow breath moved through the reeds, whether it was wind or memory of a wind. It was impossible to say. The surface of the bend responded with the gentlest tremor, not a swell, not the earlier concavity, just the smallest quiver, as though depth had adjusted to the absence of a watcher at its edge. The traveler paused. For a moment, the sense of inclusion returned, not strongly, not with the immersive weight of the second pool, but enough to remind the body that it had stood within something vast. There's a peculiar quiet that follows recognition, not silence, not emptiness, a quiet that feels like something has been understood without needing to be spoken. The traveler stepped beyond the bend. The mud softened again underfoot, yielding gently, releasing each impression more quickly now. Mist drifted low over the water in thin ribbons that thinned and scattered as the path widened. Insects resumed their slow arcs through the air. A distant bird called once, then again. The marsh did not close behind the traveler. It did not seal itself or erase the crossing. It remained as it had always been, layered, patient, aware. And yet, as the reeds thinned and the soil grew firmer, there lingered the faintest sensation of depth following at a distance, not pursuing, not attached, simply continuing. The traveler did not look back immediately. The horizon widened ahead, sky pressing downward in its broad and uncomplicated arc. The scent of dampness lightened, replaced gradually by dry grasses and sun-warmed earth. Only when the reeds had receded into a pale band along the edge of vision did the traveler turn. From this distance, the marsh appeared unchanged, reeds upright, paper bark trunks leaning inward in their patient circle, dark water where it had always been dark. Nothing rose from the surface, nothing broke it. No ripple betrayed the vastness below. And yet, the traveler understood that the depth had not diminished with distance. It remained as it had before this crossing, as it would after. The Bunyip did not belong to a single bend or pool. She belonged to the continuity of water that remembers, to the slow adjustment beneath still surfaces, to the subtle delay in reflections that suggests something interpreting rather than merely mirroring. She endured not in sudden appearances, but in the enduring weight of black water that absorbs light and holds it without return. The traveler resumed walking. Each step on firm ground felt slightly sharper now, more defined at the edges. The body reclaimed its boundaries slowly, breath settling into its familiar rhythm. But somewhere beneath that rhythm, Beneath bone and muscle and measured pace, there lingered a quieter one, steady, deep, unhurried. It did not demand attention, it simply existed. And long after the marsh had disappeared entirely from view, long after the scent of water had left the air, there were moments when the traveler would pause without knowing why, sensing the faintest inward curve in still water remembered, the slightest delay in reflection where none should be. Not fear, not longing, just the awareness that some depths that do not require witness to continue. They endure, they listen, they wait without impatience. And if you ever find yourself where the land begins to loosen, where reeds rise taller than they should, and water lies flat and darker than shadow, step gently, stand still. Notice whether the reflection moves precisely when you do, or whether it lingers. There are places where depth is not emptiness, where stillness is not absence, where something vast turns slowly beneath the surface and chooses not to rise. The marsh does not call out, it does not warn, it does not reveal, it simply holds, and what it holds remains. If this crossing settled into you, follow veiled beasts so the next one finds you when the night grows quiet again. And if you are not ready to leave the wetlands, if you would linger longer at the edge of black water where time thins and depth draws closer, there is a deeper telling waiting on Patreon, where the marsh opens just a little further and the stillness leans in. Until next time, walk softly. Some waters remember, and some are listening.
Hush now, little listener, the forest knows your name. Soft feet in the shadow, soft melts that night.